Hi, I'm Josh, here to talk about September's games, which include 2 video games, both of which are new to me, and 5 board games, a couple of which were also new to me, and one of those being an instant 10 out of 10 game for me. So let's start out with the 2 video games, going in order of the game I have the most hours into to the game I have the least number of hours into. And the first game came about as a result of a search for a 4X light style of game after playing a game called Empire, or the new version of which is called Empire Deluxe Combined Edition, I think. And I enjoyed that experience. I was looking for something a little bit similar, but maybe a little bit more modern with a little bit more going on. Last month I mentioned I had tried the Battle for Polytopia, or the Battle of Polytopia, and that didn't end up being a hit with me. So in doing some searching on this topic, I discovered people recommending a game called the Battle for Wesnoth. The first thing that was amazing to discover was the fact that this game is entirely free. So there are a couple ways you can acquire the game. I decided to download it through Steam, and after 7.5 hours of gameplay, this is the review I wrote on Steam. I saw this game recommended as a good 4X light game. After completing the first couple of easy level campaigns, I'm extremely impressed with this game. Considering that it's 100% free, I wasn't expecting campaigns that offer compelling stories with great writing and beautifully done art pieces in the background for the between game stories. They've taken full advantage of the fun fantasy setting by offering a wide variety of units and all sorts of different abilities, while keeping the game easy to play by keeping all the information easily accessible. I love the fact that this is a skirmish game where individual characters are named and actually matter, since you can bring them with you from one scenario to the next and watch their experience and skill levels grow, assuming they survive. While there are other games I rate lower that I enjoy more, this one simply deserves a high rating for offering such a quality experience at no cost. And as a result, I have rated this game a 9 out of 10. So as I alluded to in the review, it's essentially a individual character level tactical combat game where you have different scenarios played out over the course of a campaign, and there are several different campaigns to play through, starting at easy level and progressing to higher levels, more difficult levels. And each of the unit types are associated with different fantasy races and thus have different skills and abilities and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and like I mentioned here, although I might not rate it a 9 out of 10 as an overall nearly perfect gaming experience for me, I think it is very fun and very well done, and just the fact that it is free, it costs me nothing to play, is what has bumped it up maybe a point or a point and a half higher than I would normally rate it. And then, just as the previous game came about as a result of a search for a 4X light game, this next game I'm going to talk about is one that came up in my search for a route building style of train game. So when it comes to board gaming, I have tended to really enjoy most train games. So games like Railroad Tycoon, which later got renamed to Railways of the World, has always been a favorite of mine. The deck building game, very uncreatively named Trains, has also been a favorite. And there's other similar games where you can build routes on the board and then deliver goods or passengers occasionally, or whatever it happens to be. But you get to build these routes and have some kind of an economic engine going on in the process. And so that love of train games made me think there must be some good train games on Steam that provide a similar experience in video game format, and I've had not much success so far. So one obvious thing that seemed like I should be checking out first is the game that Railroad Tycoon / Railways of the World was based on, which is Sid Meier's Railroads. So I did purchase and download that game and tried it briefly, but the graphic style and user interface just felt like a bit of a muddy mess and didn't provide a great play experience, so I didn't stick with that game for very long. I mentioned Mini Metro last month and how it was cleverly done, but I enjoyed Mini Motorways more. I also tried a game called Train Valley, which was pretty close to what I was looking for, except for the kind of real-time aspect of them pushing out trains whether your tracks are ready or not, which leads to all kinds of problems, can be a little bit frustrating, although I need to figure out if there's a pause button that will allow me to create a more relaxed play experience. And then there was another game called Rolling Line that's a newer game that I purchased and started playing, only to realize that there's no game there. It's just a wide open sandbox for you to build stuff with an extremely frustrating user interface that makes everything extremely difficult to do. So I ended up getting a refund through Steam on that particular game. All of these games I paid only a few bucks for on Steam sales, so it wasn't like I was out much money in general. That was the one game where I had spent probably a little bit more than 10 bucks and I ended up getting it refunded. The game I'm talking about now is a game called Railbound, which I have 5.5 hours of playtime into. And even though this game has provided some fun, it's still not the type of experience I was looking for. It's still not that route building train game of delivering goods, maybe getting an economy going. And so I really need some suggestions from you. Please, if there's any game that comes to mind as I talk about this sort of thing, please recommend below in the comments a game for me to check out so that I can find what I'm trying to find here. But Railbound, it turns out, is entirely a puzzle game with very short little puzzles that don't connect with each other really in any way other than with the mechanism they're building the puzzle around, and you just jump from one puzzle to the next, solving the particular layout puzzle that they've given you here. And so I'm going to read what I wrote on my Steam review for Railbound. I was looking for a route building style of train game, but this ended up being strictly a puzzle game. This game is essentially a series of spatial puzzles that adds new and interesting elements as you play through the campaign. Don't let the cute presentation fool you. While each level starts off with very simple puzzles, they ramp up in difficulty to the point where I was already needing clues on a couple of puzzles in the first couple of levels, and unless you can hold several different iterations of track layout in your head at once, like some sort of chess master, it really does become too difficult. In that respect, the game reminds me of Bridge Constructor Medieval, which is a similar puzzle game that can get quite difficult as well. Though I feel like there might be a little bit more variety in what Railbound is offering in terms of its puzzles. So I've had some fun with it. I've had some frustration with it. It's provided me with a decent few hours. I rate the game for now a 7.5 out of 10. I'd love to be able to focus on maybe just all the puzzles except for the very hardest ones of each level, but I don't think you unlock the next level or series of puzzles until you've completed all the basic ones of the previous level, so I don't know if that's even possible. But yeah, Railbound is one that was fun for some puzzle solving, but not exactly what I was looking for. So let's get to the board games now. The one board game that I acquired in the month of September was Can't Stop, and pretty much the entire reason I purchased it was because I got kind of tired of playing Flip 7 and realized that for a good push your luck game, I would rather be playing Can't Stop. And in fact, as I go through the 5 games that I played in September in order of my lowest rated game to my highest rated game, Can't Stop is the first one I'm going to talk about because I did get a chance to play it with Paul. The first thing I have to mention is when I saw this Eagle Gryphon Games edition on the shelf of the game store, I was quite pleased to see that the overall size of the game was smaller than the original game, which I felt was probably twice as big as it really needed to be. I was actually hoping to find an even smaller kind of travel edition, but this is what was available. So initially I was pleased with that until I opened the box and saw that the game board is now this sort of neoprene mat that is permanently messed up because it was stored in the box, diagonally in the box, in this compartment of the box rolled up like that, but I cannot for the life of me get this mat to flatten out. I've kept this under my Gloomhaven box for a couple of days and tried various methods of trying to flatten it out, but no matter what I do, this thing is permanently warped. And when I looked on BoardGameGeek and the images there, I saw that there were some that had the exact same problem and others that did not, that were flat. So I don't know if there's some method of making a neoprene mat sit flat, but when I did play it with Paul, it became very problematic with trying to get the wooden pieces to not slide downhill when they were on certain spots of the mat. So that's really frustrating and annoying. I mean, it is a fun game. I rate it 7.5 out of 10. Paul in the past has rated it 8 out of 10, and it's just a really basic dice rolling push your luck game, which is right up my alley. So it's certainly fun to play, but unfortunately the mat kind of ruins the play experience. The next game I'm going to talk about is Steam Torpedo, which is a game I've had for years and years. It's a little two-player game of steampunk submarine combat where each player builds a submarine out of square tiles, populates it with 5 crew members, and then over the course of the game, the crew members run around your submarine, activating various compartments to attack your opponent's submarine and ultimately try to destroy your opponent's submarine. And it's an interesting game in that once the game is set up and you start playing, there is no luck involved whatsoever. It is entirely 100% a tactical game. So in that aspect, it is completely up to the players to do well in the game, which is interesting. The other thing I think is really cool is I have the expansions for it, which provide a lot of different compartment tiles so that players can, if they want to, draft tiles and build their own submarine and try out their own build against your opponent. However, every time I've played just the basic version of the game with people, nobody has really liked the game as much as I have. So over the years, there have been maybe 2-3 people I've tried the game with, none of whom were all that interested in playing it again. So I was thinking about the game recently and just was really wanting to mess around with it. So I decided to play it solo, even though it's absolutely not a solo game. It's not a good solo experience. I just tried to play the best I could with both submarines and see how it worked out, but I was just feeling the urge to mess around with it, so I gave it a shot. The one negative thing I'll say about the game is that the design is such that in order to be able to really tell what's going on, one player has to play upside down so that their submarine compartments and their overall shape of their submarine is aligned with the other player's submarine. Otherwise, if your own submarine is such that your tiles are face up, your submarine itself is facing backwards, so you have to think backwards for every action you do, and ultimately it's just easier to play upside down and try to read the text on your room tiles in an upside down fashion. Other than that little annoyance, I think it's a cool game, and I just wish I had somebody to explore the aspect of building submarines with and attacking each other, but so it goes, I guess. I rate Steam Torpedo 8 out of 10, and when I played this years and years ago with Paul, he had given it a 6.5 out of 10, proving again that my opponents just don't love this particular game. But next up is my newest game, and that is Doggerland. I mentioned last month that I had picked up this game from another BoardGameGeek member from a game auction. I picked it up used, and I initially played a solo game because I didn't know exactly when I'd get to play the game, and it does have a solo mode. So this one, the solo mode does work quite well. I'm glad it did, because learning the game takes a bit of effort. It comes with a 36-page rule book, although the rule book has this really nice linen finish. I really like the quality of the paper in the rule book. And to be fair, the game, or the rule book, has these occasional comic pages to put the players in the setting and illustrate some form of or some aspect of the rules in comic form here. And it does give lots of picture examples of gameplay. So even though it's a 36-page rule book, there's a lot of pictures and a lot of examples going on, which is great because there are a lot of rules to learn. It's not perfect. I mean, something as basic as how many tiles or which tiles do you use depending on the number of players isn't explained super well, but most of it is explained not just really well, but occasionally over-explained, like in this example, where it says the same thing 3 times in 3 sentences, essentially. It says, "These 2 placements must be made in 2 different programming turns. You cannot place them both at once. It must be 2 turns." Okay, I get it, 2 turns. But yeah, I guess they want to make sure you understand what you're doing. And at the heart of the game, though, it's just a very straightforward worker placement game. So you have this prehistoric tribe of people. Every game round, you're sending them out, assigning them to do different actions in a worker placement style format, and then you're getting resources and trying to work towards victory points. I will say that one thing that did help with the gameplay is downloading this very detailed player aid from BoardGameGeek from the file section of the Doggerland page on BGG. The player aid that comes with the game isn't as thorough as this, and if it were not for this, the game would be much more difficult to play, having to remember exactly what resources you need to do certain actions and exactly what resources you get from doing certain actions and all of that stuff. So, but with this player aid, it's a pretty straightforward gaming experience overall. It is a long game, though. The solo game took me about 2.5 hours to play through. I did actually get a chance to play it 2 players with Paul as well, and we played the shorter version of the game. So they provide a game that is a slightly accelerated game where you start on turn 3 out of 8 instead of turn 1 out of 8, and they give you a couple extra things for starting off a bit later in the game. We played that shorter 6-turn format, and it still took us about 2.5 hours to play through. And so playing the full 8-turn game with 2 players probably would have taken us over 3 hours, a little over 3 hours. Now, the game does play up to 4 players, and so if you're put to play the full game with 4 players, it's going to be a really long game. I don't know how long it would ultimately end up being. And I really do think it would probably play best with 3 players if you're willing to sit down and make a whole afternoon or whole evening of it, I guess. I will say that this is a rare instance of it being a fairly enjoyable solo experience for me, despite the fact that I've played 2 solo games this month. This is not something I typically tend to enjoy doing with board games, which is why I've been trying to explore video games a lot more, because I just really am typically not into the solo board gaming experience. But it worked out pretty well. I managed to squeak out a victory on easy mode, and then when I played it with Paul, obviously it was way more fun to play against an actual in-person opponent, and Paul ended up beating me pretty handily, 71 points to 62, but it was still quite a fun experience. And I would like to try the full 8-turn game, even though, like I said, it's a bit of a time commitment. I rate Doggerland an 8.5 out of 10. I can't remember if I asked Paul what his rating was. If I did, I'll put it on the screen here, but I quite like the game. And one thing I will say is that typically I don't tend to enjoy games where you have to feed your people. In other words, games where you have stuff going on, you're trying to do cool things and earn victory points and all this sort of stuff, but you also have to put a certain amount of energy into acquiring food to feed your people so that you don't get hit with negative consequences. And I dislike games where I'm having to avoid negative consequences instead of just doing cool stuff and trying to get positive outcomes. That tends to not sit well for me. But the fact that this is a prehistoric themed game where survival is ultimately what you're aiming for here, and food and shelter are 2 of the major things you're working towards every turn, I will say it's at least thematically appropriate, and it makes sense that a lot of what you're doing in the game is just trying to survive, and to do well, what you're trying to do is eke out as many points as you can with the remaining resources you have after you've done just the basic survival stuff. So for me, it works in Doggerland. And since Paul was over, we had to, of course, play Sky Team again. So we actually played it with a red difficulty level airport for the first time. So I think there are 4 difficulty levels. Red is the 3rd or the 2nd hardest level, and we won it with relative ease, and we even had an unused coffee remaining after we'd landed safely. So we absolutely killed this red level, and that was quite pleasing. And this is a game that I rate 9 out of 10. This is a perfect 10 out of 10 for Paul, which is why we tend to play it so often when he's here, which works for me because I like the game a lot too. It's a fun little cooperative dice-based game. Evan has rated it 8.5 out of 10 in the past, and my nephew Charlie has rated it 8 out of 10. Now, my big hit for the month, my new to me, well, kind of new to me game that is an instant 10 out of 10 is Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. So in the past, I have played through the entirety of the Gloomhaven base game. I've played through that whole campaign over the course of 50-something or 60-something gameplays, and absolutely loved the experience. It was a 10 out of 10 game for me. And my youngest son, Wyatt, expressed interest in playing Gloomhaven on his birthday weekend, so I have had Jaws of the Lion sitting on the shelf that I have never played before, and it is definitely a much easier way of getting into this highly complex fantasy combat game than the basic game was. And so of course I was like, yes, let's play Jaws of the Lion. And it was so much fun. Gloomhaven has been described as sort of like a Dungeons and Dragons RPG in a box, in that each of the scenarios that you are playing put you and your fellow adventurers in a combat situation where you have to defeat some bad characters. In the process, you acquire loot and money, and then in between rounds before the next scenario, you go to the city and you do city actions and you purchase gear and you upgrade your character, and then you go on to the next level and you work through the campaign in that manner. And it's all done through this very clever card play. I was a little worried that the complexity and the card management and everything else going on was going to be a challenge for my kids, but they're certainly at an age now where they can handle that sort of level of complexity, and especially with the way that Jaws of the Lion works players gradually into the full rules over the course of 5 scenarios that are kind of like tutorial scenarios, although they are part of the overall campaign. It does make it, like I said, so much easier to get into than base Gloomhaven was, and just an immense amount of fun. I give this a perfect 10 out of 10. Wyatt also gave it a perfect 10 out of 10, although in terms of his overall rankings, he would still rank Arcadia Quest higher. Evan gave it an 8 out of 10. He wasn't quite as excited about it, but still enjoyed it a fair bit. The true test is whether these guys ask to get it to the table again, or whether they more or less forget about it and move on to other things. That'll be, I guess, what ultimately decides if we keep working through the campaign or not. I don't know if Wyatt and I will end up just playing through it 2 players, but we'll see how it goes. I'll let you know. And that was it for my month of September. Please let me know what games you've been playing. I always love to hear about what games especially are exciting you, what have been big hits for you, what you've maybe acquired recently that you're excited to play. Do get into the comments and let me know about it, and I just appreciate you watching. Cheers. The deck building game called the one board game I acquired in the month of I rate Steam per, which works well with, so I was like,